The Association of American Medical Colleges is pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, From Pre-Med to Med Student, Student Tips for Successfully Preparing for the Mcat exam and medical school. My name is Emily, and it's my pleasure to be the facilitator for today's event. I would like to welcome the participants joining us today. Please note, we muted all participants' audio. If you need assistance, please email aamc@compartners.com. This presentation will last up to 60 minutes and will include question and answer opportunities during the webinar and at the end. You can submit a question at any time using the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. During Q&A, our presenters will answer as many questions as time allows. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Erica Rutzler from the Association of American Medical Colleges.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, From Pre-Med to Med Student Tips for Successfully Preparing for the Mcat exam in medical school. I'm Erica Rutzler, Director of Test Development and Science Education for the Mcat program at the Association of American Medical Colleges. We are so happy that you could join us during this busy time of year. We know that you will find the next hour to be very informative discussion. We are so fortunate today to have with us 3 first-year medical students who are going to discuss with us how they prepared for the Mcat exam. You'll hear their strategies and tips for getting ready and those that they continue to use even as medical students now. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the discussion. You can submit your questions in the Q&A box on your screen throughout this discussion. As a reminder, we will keep the questions focused on preparation. If you have questions about other parts of the application process and related AAMC resources, please visit our website and reach out if you need further assistance. And I have something exciting to announce. As a thank you for attending today, we are going to randomly select 10 attendees to receive a free Mcat Official Prep online only bundle. If you are selected, you will receive an email in the coming days after the webinar. So let's go ahead and get started by introducing our panelists today. Our first one is Oliver Chalfant. He's an MD candidate at the University of Illinois at Chicago. We have Jenny Ijoma, who is an MD PhD candidate at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School, Princeton University. And then lastly, we have Natalia Kellum. She's an MD candidate at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. So let's go ahead and get into the questions. This is for everyone. We know students often wonder how they can get started preparing for the exam and how long they should spend preparing, which varies for everyone. There's a large amount of content and skills covered on the test, but each of you used really good strategies to get started and during your preparation. So can you share how you approached your preparation for the Mcat exam? Jenny, will you go first and start us off?
Sure. So I got started with my Mcat Prep by taking a diagnostic exam. I wanted to see what my weaknesses were and then hone in on what those are first and then work sort of backwards so I wouldn't waste too much time. I was using a lot of self-testing materials like the question banks from the AAMC or Kaplan resources and whatnot that I could crowdsource online. And this process took me about 1.5 years because I wanted to prepare for the Mcat after I graduated from my undergrad, and I had to balance it while I was doing some post-bac research work at during my gap years as well. So I was doing that and using flashcards, using Anki, and I was like just following up with myself a lot with using those materials to just test myself frequently and to like just double check where my progress is going.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jenny. Oliver, how about you?
Hey, so I was, I guess, a non-traditional student. I didn't really decide to apply to med school until about 1 year after my graduation. And I knew for a while that I wanted to do something with medical sciences, but for me, the actual realization like med school is the next step was very sudden, and I was very excited. I just kind of like jumped into it. And I didn't really have years of preparation behind it. I didn't have a pre-med advisor, or I didn't even know any pre-meds in undergrad. So I was very much just learning things on the fly and really relied on a comprehensive resource, which for me was Kaplan. Kind of told me everything I need to study and how to prepare. And so I got my guidance mainly from that, reading online what I could. Having been out of undergrad for a while and far away from my core classes, I really had to focus a lot just on refreshing material I hadn't seen in years, as well as, being a non-traditional student. There were classes I didn't take, like sociology and psychology, so I had to learn that from scratch from the Kaplan books. And I felt that they did a great job at covering all those bases for me and really giving me the foundation that I needed. And for some things where, it just wasn't clicking from the Kaplan books, I utilize like Khan Academy videos on YouTube. They have some really great, free videos, really well illustrated and very clear and easy to follow. So I found that's a very helpful resource. And I think they also have some more like comprehensive study plans now that I didn't know about back then. So that's something to check out. And yeah, as I was going through this, I just had to constantly reformulate my strategy. The MCAT is such an insane amount of material compared to undergrad that I had to utilize some strategies I never did before, like flashcards and spaced repetition, and really, stressing that active recall to make sure that I was retaining all the things I was learning. And then also using the AAMC practice exams on their website to make sure I was familiar with the structure and the style of the MCAT. And then I would say I probably waited too long to do that. I really recommend like giving yourself time after that to analyze how you did and then respond appropriately to it. Like I waited till the last few days before the exam, not intentionally, but just because I was emphasizing learning everything else so much. And I found some knowledge gaps that unfortunately I just didn't really have time to address. And I was also really shocked like how difficult the exam is. Like you spend all that time reading Kaplan and getting that knowledge and content base, and then you come to an exam that's really not a content exam. It's like a critical analysis and a reasoning exam. And then looks a lot more like the SAT than it does anything I did in undergrad. Very like passage based, excerpts, things out of research articles. And so you need all that knowledge, but you need to make sure that you're able to apply it to these style of questions as well.
Thanks, Oliver. Can you remind us how long you prepared and how much you prepared daily in your preparation?
Yeah, so for me, I took about 3 months to prepare. And, at the time I didn't really have the stamina that I do in medical school. So I was probably studying like 5 hours a day or so. But, your mileage might vary.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much. And Natalia, how did you get started?
So luckily I had the privilege of actually knowing that I wanted to be a doctor going right into undergrad. And that really was allowed me the ability to shape my class choices and my preparation for the MCAT based on that realization entering into undergrad. So I took a bit of a pre-med major at my undergrad university, and that allowed me to take a lot of the coursework early on that was going to be tested on the MCAT, such as anatomy and all of the classes that all pre-meds take, like organic chemistry, biochemistry, and chemistry. So for me, it was really important that I planned when I was going to take some key classes at the same time I was preparing for my MCAT. And so I planned to take my MCAT at the end of my junior year, and I spent between January and May of that spring junior semester studying for the MCAT. And in order to kill two birds with one stone, I took a lot of core classes during that time that would actually allow me to study for the MCAT at the same time. So I took biochemistry, I took psych and sociology. I had the opportunity to take a neuroscience class. So that really helped fill in some of those content area gaps that I figured I wouldn't be as strong in based on my previous 2 years of coursework. And with that, I always made sure that throughout my years, I was teaching and tutoring to help other students. Teaching is a passion of mine, and I was lucky enough to have a lot of opportunities to work as a TA, as well as run some private tutoring in all of my core content work. So I tried to tutor in biochemistry, anatomy, organic chemistry, and that really helped keep refreshing the content and really push that I understood the why behind every single concept that was being reviewed with students, because that's really what's going to make this content sticky and what's going to help you work through challenging problems that might not necessarily be a really quick recall or something that you remember right off the bat when you read a problem. But also during that time, I knew it was important to hone in on MCAT specific content and really practice those questions, like how Oliver alluded to, that are very different than the classes you might take in undergrad. And so I did take a self-study course, and it helped me kind of identify weak areas that I hadn't necessarily spent a lot of time tutoring in to prioritize my study time. I also tried to crowdsource materials. I was an EMT. I was a junior, so I knew a lot of upperclassmen, and I tried to ask them where they got discounted Kaplan books from. I would look on Reddit and see if I could find some information on there. I used some of those Kaplan videos or even some of my old notes that I had from past classes to really help me through difficult content work. And that really helped me to be able to look at a variety of material and not just focus on one specific content course that maybe wasn't clicking with me the first time I received that information, whether it was from an undergrad class or from the Kaplan books itself. And another thing that was really helpful for me in my preparation progress was actually trying to prioritize time to answer questions. I really wish I started this process earlier, but really doing a lot of Q-bank questions on areas where I was weak a day or two after I just reviewed the content to really solidify that, and also get a lot of practice with answering the questions themselves, because that's half of the game. You can know all the content, but you have to be a good question answer as well. I tried to do practice tests for endurance and spent a lot more time trying to analyze why I got questions wrong. A really helpful tip was I kept a spreadsheet of all of the answers I got right and wrong for every full-length practice test. And it took a lot of time to review. I almost took a full day to review all that information, but it was really important because it helped me generate patterns in why I was getting answers wrong, whether it was a real content gap or maybe I was always falling for a distractor answer. And that was really helpful for me to evaluate how my progress was doing, not only based on my score, but on my study strategies as well. I also really tried to emphasize a few final rehearsals before I actually took my MCAT test to really stimulate a test environment. I tried driving to a new library that was about 30 minutes away to take a practice test. I would eat the same thing I was planning to eat on the morning of my MCAT. I took the same level of breaks. And I feel like that really helped calm my anxiety on test day, and was a really helpful strategy to actually put myself in a more focused mindset where I wasn't tempted to pick up my phone, and I wasn't in a familiar library where I was comfortable enough and I could maybe trick myself into not having the same test day experience as if I were to show up for the test. So I definitely would say to try to get a variety of resources, make sure that you're practicing your practice tests and your practice questions way earlier than you think before you've mastered content, so you get practice actually learning how to answer the questions, not just focusing on content, as well as trying to keep a spreadsheet of why you got questions right or wrong to help your diagnostic process along the way as you continue to learn material and also identify some weak spots.
Thank you for that, Natalia. And I've always found really interesting how you did the final rehearsal, which I had never thought of before. I think that's a fantastic thing to do if you're able. And one other thing I wanted to note is, like, all the panelists all prepared very differently, but they either all started early with their practice questions and practice tests, or they wish they had. So that might be a tip that you definitely want to take away today, is to start early with your practicing. So we're going to go on to question 2. Can you describe more about how you adjusted your approach from passive to active learning? And this is for Oliver.
Yeah, so like I said, I used the the Kaplan 7-book series for the MCAT. And as I started to get through maybe the 3rd book, I realized I was forgetting everything from the 1st book and the 2nd book. And that was really frustrating because I spent a lot of time trying to understand that content and make sense of it. And really, so to adjust to that, I just had to start using more flashcards, and that's something I didn't do as an undergrad. But the MCAT is just so much material. I think there's like 2,000 pages in that Kaplan 7-book series that you just have to remember. And like content-wise, it's stuff you've done before. It's not any harder than undergrad. Like, if you've done it once, you can do it again. But the real challenge with the MCAT is trying to bring all that chemistry and biology and physics under one roof and remember it all, and then be able to apply it to this, difficult passage-based questions. So for me, the big shift that started, helping me retain things was the flashcards. And I utilized Anki on my phone a lot. I'll say something unpopular. I don't personally like Anki. It's necessary, and I think it's a really good resource to use, but it's not my favorite. I find it very unintuitive. So I say, start learning it now, because for some of us, that learning curve is a little steep. But I also really like to make my own, flashcards by hand. So like, Anki, like sometimes you'll get a question that will say like, this step in the Krebs cycle, you lose something. And it's like, you know, you might not even know if you say, you know, carbon dioxide, something's lost. Like you leverage those context clues. And actually, you know, brought my flashcards here for a little show and tell. I just, you know, I made a card like this, just says Krebs cycle, and on the back is literally everything about the Krebs cycle. So I kept it really vague and like forced myself to really try and recall everything about that concept as I could, and to remember like all the inputs, outputs, and the importance of it, and all the steps, and do that straight from memory without like leveraging context clues. Because I noticed like an Anki, sometimes, you know, I'll see the first two words and my brain will fill in the rest of the card without even like really stopping and doing that active recall and thinking about what is on this card and what is it trying to get me to understand. And I'll see people do this in class too, like flying through Anki cards so quick that you know, it's like I can't even read what their card says before they're on to the next one. So, you know, really be careful that when you're doing this, you're actually engaging the active recall process and not just answering the Anki card, but like remembering the process, you know, and all the mechanisms that underlie that you're going to need to apply to the exam and to, you know, your future patient encounters.
Great, thanks, Oliver. And yeah, writing them down actually is a way to learn, because it connects your hand to your brain. So sometimes just typing doesn't work the same as writing, and getting pre-made ones doesn't always work as well for some. So that's a really good thing to point out. The next question is for Natalia. How did preparing for the science and CARS sections differ for you?
So what I've seen this question pop up a lot in the Q&A as well. One really important information piece that you need to know about the CARS section is you are getting an independent passage that you have never seen before. And the questions are really testing your ability to evaluate that passage and not include other sources of information, but really objectively answer the questions that are being asked on the passage based on the passage itself. And so one of the best tips of advice I heard in preparing for the CARS section was being able to read a question, and before you read a single answer choice, go back to the passage and write down your predicted answer for that question before you even evaluate any of the answer choices. I think this is a really helpful test taking strategy for any of the sections, because then you're not relying on getting tricked in maybe to a distractor answer or another answer that looks enticing, but you're going based off your own information from reading the passage objectively before you were given any feeder answers as possibilities in your own head. And so this is actually a skill that I still use in medical school, being able to write down information that I know from my own knowledge, whether that be content knowledge, whether that be a passage that I have in front of me, and evaluating what I think the best answer choice would be based on that. And then going through the answer choices and looking to see which might be the most closely related answer to what I had evaluated by myself. I think this was the best approach for CARS section because I wasn't really relying on content knowledge. I was really trying to just go objectively based on the information that was provided for me, and really practicing a lot of the CARS sections and evaluating why I got questions wrong and why I got questions right really taught me a lot about distractors and finding patterns in answers and how to answer questions more correctly based on the answer choices that were provided for me. In hindsight and reflecting on this experience, I really wish I had approached a lot of my science sections that way. So if no one's taken a science practice test yet for the MCAT, you'll realize that 85% of the questions have a passage attached to them. Now, that doesn't mean that you can only use the passage to answer those questions. It does rely on a lot of content knowledge and building those connections. Like Oliver said, that's where that tutoring came in, that kind of layered experience of learning this information in a different way, teaching it to other people and kind of practicing itself with practice questions came in. But I would really say that I wish I had approached my science sections with a more objective eye, that I could answer each question with my own knowledge and with the passage, what they gave in front of me, rather than going right to the answer choices and trying to pick the best one, because I think I would have gotten a lot right and not fallen into pitfalls of certain answers, choosing between A and B and taking that 50-50 shot if I had really relied on what I knew rather than what I thought I knew based on the answer choices. So I think if you're preparing for CARS, make sure you do a lot of practice questions, make sure you take the time to analyze it a lot more specifically than maybe other sections, and make sure that you get in the habit of writing down answer choices before you evaluate them. There's some great resources online about how to look at those kind of pattern answer choices that are incorrect through the CARS section. I would suggest that you look those up online as well. And I think that it's a great tool to continue to practice because it's something you're going to use in medical school and your careers all the time. It ended up being my best section. So I really think that it can be a strong suit for a lot of students if you take the time to practice it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Natalia. Jenny, this one's for you. When did you know you were ready to move on to a new content area? And also, when did you know you were ready to take the test?
Yeah, so you need to be able to self-assess and give yourself deadlines. And I knew that since I was balancing working while studying, I had to crunch everything that I was doing. So I was basically studying part-time compared to someone who would have a full summer or 3 months or something like that when I was studying over the year and a half that I was preparing for my MCAT. And I would see that some days that I'd be too tired from work or I'd have more energy from work, and I had to like really just tailor my studying to really accommodate that because we're human and I had responsibilities to like pay bills and whatnot. So it was, I had to be very cognizant of like what my limits were and how I could approach all of that. And I was really just preparing by taking these question banks and taking these practice exams weekly, bi-weekly, and seeing what my scores were on them. And as I was either increasing or plateauing or decreasing, I would adjust how I was studying in that way. And I think that that's the best way to fine tune your study approach, because when you're able to see what your weaknesses are, you can spend that time and invest the time in the areas that matter the most compared to spending time in areas that you know you're already proficient in. One area, for example, I didn't take many psychology courses or sociology courses at all in undergrad. So I knew that that was one of my weakest areas approaching the MCAT. So I had to do a lot of self-studying and a lot of practice exams, practice Q banks focused in on that section. And I really ended up doing the best in that section because I think that I approached that the most freshly, without any biases as well, and how I wanted to like prepare for it as well. And I think that that should have been the mindset that I used for all the sections for the MCAT as well in general, because seeing that you get like a 128 or whatever the max score or something, or 132 on in the section is, shouldn't really be your like, yes, you're just done with that section, because like you should really just utilize those skills for every little part of the MCAT, because like Natalia was saying, it will really help carry you through. And I know that at the very least, when I was seeing that I was plateauing in sections, I knew that that was time for me to move on to something else. And then by the time I was seeing that, I was burning out a little bit because I was wondering when I was going to be taking the exam with COVID as well, because I had some cancellations due to COVID. And I ended up pushing back my exam out of anxiety at one point as well, because I wasn't feeling that I was prepared enough to take the exam. So I think that just really being honest with yourself and seeing that you are in the place to take the exam, that you have prepared, and reminding yourself that you're preparing to your best ability is like the best thing that you can do to see that you're ready to take the exam, and then trying your best on the test day and then using that performance and assessing that moving forward for when you are continuing with your application process.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jenny. It's interesting how you all prepared in a certain way for a certain section with a different mindset, and then you did the best in the one that it seems like you were most concerned with. And so that's an interesting thing to take away from that, I think. Okay, so this question is for everyone. Can you talk about how preparing for the MCAT exam has helped you prepare for medical school, and what strategies do you continue to use? Let's go with Oliver first.
Yes, I definitely approach medical school very different than undergrad, and a lot of that comes from my experiences with the MCAT exam. It's very similar in the sense that it's just constant, high volume information, and you have to understand at a really deep level too and integrate it all, just like the MCAT. So for me, it's easy to conceptualize it by like breaking down my study strategy into like 3 different domains, which is like active learning, active recall, and then active application. And I really, try to stress the active part about that, because, at this level, you really want to make sure that you're not just like glossing over things or remembering buzzwords, but you're really understanding all the underlying mechanisms and physiology and able to tie it together. So like if I'm, reading from a book in block 4 about autonomic pharmacology for the cardiovascular system, right? I want to go back and tie that to block 1, autonomic physiology, right? And make sure that I'm refreshing that and I'm bringing all that old content back and constantly thinking about how all these things connect, so that I can really, solidify that foundation. And also making sure that I'm, again, keeping up with that active recall and doing the flashcards. I'm definitely way too lazy to make all my own flashcards by hand now. So I use Anki instead. But again, making sure I don't fall into that trap of just answering the flashcards, but really thinking about why it is the way it is. If it says, what maneuver decreases the murmur from a hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, like you don't just want to put the answer in there because you remember seeing the card a million times. You want to think about like the preload and the afterload and the underlying physiology of why that's there every single time, because that's what's going to help you remember how these things work and be able to apply it to new situations and patient scenarios. And then also, because I didn't do enough practice problems earlier on in my MCAT, I make sure that I definitely make that an important part of my study habits now. And I do a lot of like board style questions. So my school gives us osmosis for free. So that's the one I use. I think other people prefer like Amboss or some of the other more popular ones, but I really like osmosis. It has great explanations for all the questions. It also tells you like why all the other questions are wrong. So it gives you an explanation for each wrong question. And I think that's really important, when you're doing practice problems and quizzes and exams, like don't just jump at what you think is the right answer, like really think through why every answer you think is wrong, because a lot of times that also helps you understand what those little distractors they're trying to throw in there are, and how you discriminate, between different conditions or drugs, based on these fine little details. And I actually had this problem on my last exam where I jumped at answer A because it's a very attractive answer and it was real, but it was like a zebra. It was like this really rare syndrome that I just happened to remember, that we really didn't talk about much. And I thought that's what they were testing for, people pay attention to this detail. And when I came back and looked at the actual answer, it was E, which is like this high yield thing we talked about over and over and over again. It was a much better answer, but I honestly didn't even read B through E, and I didn't, analyze B through E and try and go and prove to myself that all those are wrong. Because if I did, I probably would have got that because I learned it and I knew it. I just wasn't applying my own, test taking strategies there. So I try to be really active in solving these like multiple choice questions. And even if I think I know the answer, like go through all the vital signs and explain to yourself like why they are the way they are. Explain to yourself why the lab values are the way they are. Other things might have already led you to the answer, but you want to be constantly reinforcing the big picture and understanding how those things fit together as you go along.
Thanks, Oliver. That's really a good point. Always read the options, because even if you think it's A, there's always a chance for something better further down. Natalia, how about yourself?
Sure. So I think I mentioned this earlier, but I really use that strategy that I use to prepare for the CAR section all the time in medical school. I know every medical school does it differently, but we take our tests on iPads and they give us a sheet of paper to take during the test. I read the question and I try to write down any big helpful tips that would really help me try to break down this question and evaluate as I read the question, trying to pull from my own knowledge source before I really go down to write down any answer. I think that this is really helpful for me to actually slow down my own brain and not be so quick to jump to an answer. I also think it really forces me to think of the why, as Oliver was alluding to, behind each answer choice. And I think that really has allowed me to be successful on medical school exams, because I'm forcing myself to go through the processes of the pathology behind something or the steps that it took of the Krebs cycle to get from A to B. And I think that I really have gained a lot of confidence in being able to trust my own knowledge that I've studied and prepared hard for without getting sucked into the test being difficult and picking a distractor answer. I think that really helped me also be critical of the way I find patterns in answer choices and looking for the typical thing that might be something that students typically get wrong because they always confuse two concepts. And I think being able to take a step back out of myself from a test taker and evaluate a question objectively every time it comes on the next screen has been something that I learned through taking my MCAT and through the reflection process of how I wanted to improve to be a better studier. Another thing that I have really used is to use study resources that were given to us in any opportunity to actually help my own studying. So you get lectures in medical school, just like you get lectures in undergrad, but you also are provided with really great resources to prepare for board exams. So I try to use those books like First Aid or like a Kaplan book to help me study for the actual class that I'm taking right now. And then I'm familiar with the test taking resources. I'm familiar with the type of questions that are going to be asked of me in the future. And I really recommend that to anyone who's maybe struggling in undergrad classes right now. If you have access to some of those really great videos like from Khan Academy or those really great resources that you can buy. Like you can get an MCAT book for like $15, even if it's a few years old. It's a great resource to be able to like organize information in a way that your teacher might not have in undergrad, and you're spending a lot less time trying to figure it out for yourself. And there's a really great way that it's organized and explained to you, and then take it further, go explain it back to someone else. Teach your friends, teach your dog, talk in your room alone, give an opportunity to really make sure that you're testing yourself and explaining those concepts. And I think that it's a really powerful tool to be able to explain something to yourself and rationalize why the answer is right. And then that really kind of decreases some anxiety. Also, just be proactive with your time. You don't have to write down the entire prep cycle. Write down the 1 or 2 things that were really important for that question and move on. These are time tests, same with the MCAT. And it's important to make sure that you're using your time wisely, as well as skipping questions if they're really difficult for you, because that's a waste of time to spend so much time on just one question. I also think it's really important to spend time each day and be really specific about what you're studying. That's something I really gained from my MCAT prep, to make sure that I was writing down from 2 to 3, I am doing chapter 1, or I'm just going to review anatomy, because I think it's really important to give yourself a plan and really treat it like a job, treat it like a class, and make sure that you're keeping yourself responsible, because it's really hard unless you're attending a class to make sure that you're hitting certain chapters and just say, oh, Saturdays for studying. It's really easy to distract yourself and not really be able to go in with a plan. So I have my planner next to me. I write down what I'm doing every day before I go to bed. It just makes me feel comfortable. I give myself a daily schedule, much like a class routine. And that really helped me stay accountable and make sure that if I knew I was spending a lot more time than I had accounted for, that I was adjusting my schedule accordingly moving forward. And that's been a really great tip for medical school, to make sure that my life is balanced, that I eat dinner and I put the textbooks down, and that you have to really make sure that you give time for yourself in this process, because it's hard and you have to be graceful with yourself and be kind.
That's very good advice, Natalia. Thank you so much for that. And then Jenny, how about you?
So I found the tools that I was using during the MCAT really helpful as I transitioned into medical school, because I found myself actually now utilizing spreadsheets and all these different types of documents to have calendars of what Natalia was detailing out, at like how I was going to spend my day and what I was going to allot my time to make sure that I didn't waste my time on different things that weren't valuable, or that I made sure that I was reinforcing areas that I was weak in. And I saw that Anki was really the best resource for me to use, unfortunately, compared to Oliver. Yeah, I live or die for Anki. I just really love that program so much. And I utilized it a lot during my MCAT prep, and I use it a lot right now in med school as well. I try to keep up with it, and when I fall behind, I try to find ways to catch up again, even though it's really easy to fall behind. And I know that over this entire some webinars, while we've described different ways about everything and how different our brains are, but I think that's something that I'm now reflecting as well, is that while I was preparing for the MCAT, I was so overwhelmed by all the different strategies that people would want to utilize. And I felt resource overload was a big thing. And then that's a big trigger word that they throw at you in medical school as well. So I think that being patient with yourself and seeing what you can hold and being kind with yourself is really important, because you can only take on so much and you can only do so much. So try one thing out and see if that works for you. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. And it's okay if it works for someone else, and it's okay if it doesn't work for you. So that's something that I keep trying to reflect on right now when my friends and I have debates on which lecture was the best for explaining XYZ thing, or which person has the right understanding of this topic to get this point across and stuff like that. And it reminds me of just when I was studying for my MCAT and doing the same things that Oliver and Natalia were talking about, and really working with my resources to see what was guiding me in the best direction, and not just what was the most popular online or what was trending or anything like that. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. And that's such a good example. We just happen to have a good example with Oliver, who's not a fan of the one resource, and then you, Jenny, who used it, and that was best for you. And that's the thing, not all of these suggestions are good for everybody. And I can see how there'd be resource overload, and you have to kind of look into yourself and figure out, how do I learn best? And like Jenny just said, if it doesn't work, move on to a new resource or move on to a new method, and then go from there. So that was really good. Thank you. Question 6 is going to, or this next question, which is 6, is going to be for everyone. What would you do differently if you had to prepare for the MCAT exam and apply to medical school all over again? You had to go back to the beginning. Oliver, can you start us off?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I would take the practice exams earlier. I would start the flashcards from the beginning, but that's not really the point I want to belabor. I think like if I had to do it all over again, I would spend a lot more time on the rest of my application and understanding what the actual importance of the MCAT is within that process, because I think there are a lot of misconceptions in the pre-med community about the importance of these like objective measures. And what they really mean, or at least I had, misconceptions about that. And I actually ended up doing really, really well on the MCAT and had a high GPA. But the rest of my application was totally deficient and totally rushed my first time applying in 2018. But I had, other people kind of like feeding that misconception, like, with those grades, you can get in anywhere. Like, there's no way you're not getting in the med school. And to be honest, the first time, like I failed spectacularly to get into med school. Like I got like 2 interviews at lower to mid-tier schools and 0 acceptances. And that was really devastating for me. And, get prepared for that because, not everyone gets in their first time. In fact, the statistics aren't totally in your favor, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to be a great physician or that like you can't re-strategize and get in if you keep trying. Even if you have like a really good cycle, you might get like 5 acceptances, like really good cycle, you're still going to get like 20 rejections. And to me, that was like the most emotionally difficult thing to deal with in this entire, medical school process. Like I really had to sit with that question of, do I even want to do this again? Because that was so challenging for me. And instead of jumping right back into it, I really took the time to sit with that question and seek out other experiences. I took several gap years and tried to find other experiences that were going to help me answer that, help me explore my motivations. And I really wanted to be deliberate and not just like check boxes and go collect hours and again, more of those like metrics or whatever. I would really find things I was passionate about that like spoke to me as a person and showed like who I was and what I was interested in and like what I was dedicated to. And so for me, I like infectious disease. I like social things. So I was, invested in the syringe exchange, doing outreach work. And I was a research assistant as well. I also worked at a university hospital infectious disease clinic. And that really helped me like develop my motivations and develop my insights and come back and articulate those a lot better on my essays the next time and a lot better, in my interviews. And the next cycle was totally different. Like I didn't, do a post-bac to raise my grades. I didn't like retake the MCAT to raise it. Just by doing those things, I went from 2 interviews to 10 interviews. And it was like all the way up to like Johns Hopkins and WashU and some like really good programs. So, really be mindful about those other aspects of your application and how big of a difference they make. Like you can take the MCAT, multiple times to get the score you want or apply multiple times. And it's not going to overshadow all your amazing accomplishments, your unique, qualities. At the same time, you can do like really great on the MCAT and have these amazing stats, and it's not going to overshadow your deficiencies. I go to a school as someone who took the MCAT the first time and did really well. I go to the same school as people who struggled with the MCAT, but were like, had amazing leadership experience and other things. So like really understand the purpose of holistic review. It is important to have these metrics, but really don't, underestimate the importance of your own personal narrative in the application process.
That's very, very good points, all of that, Oliver. Thank you. Natalia, excuse me, Natalia?
So I think I mentioned this earlier, but I really wish I had taken full-length practice tests a lot earlier than I did. I think similar to the conversation we've had, a lot of people wish they started reading their, preparing with questions earlier. And I think that something that you may not be prepared for is really the emotional weight of what the MCAT test is. I mean, I know everyone is here because they really are excited and very passionate about entering the healthcare field and joining medicine, but you need to be aware that you have essentially put all of those hopes and dreams on one test. And in reality, like Oliver said, it's not something that's going to be determined by one test. And it's something that can really kind of be really difficult to deal with on test day. And for me, I thought I was doing really well on my practice tests. I wish I definitely had taken practice tests earlier, because as I got into the habit of taking full-length tests about a month or so before I started actually taking my real MCAT, I was like, wow, this is a lot harder than I anticipated, to have the stamina for 8 hours to sit here, to recall all this information under one roof, to be able to not get anxious and want to get up out of my chair after 8 hours. I didn't realize how stressful that process would be, or really how difficult the questions would be based on how I thought I was doing on just really content specific questions and content specific review. And so I definitely would recommend at least 3 months out, start taking practice tests, even if it's once a month. Make sure that you're really practicing just the experience of an 8-hour test and evaluating your habits. And that content knowledge will come as you continue to prepare with content and you continue to practice with content over and over again. And especially in the 2 to 3 weeks leading up for the test, make sure you're consistently doing practice tests as well as supplementing that with question bank review, with targeted knowledge review at your weaknesses. I think that that was really helpful for me to have the time after I graduated to really get some time to, or finish my 3rd year, sorry, to get some time to practice. I also think that I really wish I had thought more about the preparation of the MCAT. So like I said, it was a really big emotional weight and I wasn't prepared how nervous I was walking into that test room. I thought that I was confident and I was ready to go, and it took a big toll on me. And unfortunately, I think I didn't do exactly as well as I thought I would do on the MCAT, and I'm still really happy with my score, but I wasn't prepared. No one really told me how emotional it could have been to really feel like my whole test was on the line. But honestly, it was a really good learning experience because it's something you're going to feel again through your medical career. I don't know if anyone told you this. You have to take a lot of boards to really be a practicing doctor at the end of the day. And you're going to have to go into a medical exam after medical exam and really feel like you have the confidence to tackle that. And your patients are going to require that confidence from you too. And I think that it was an important lesson for me to know that even though it was a stressful emotional weight in the test, that there's ways to prepare to calm that anxiety, to practice and test like environments to really help with in the moment de-stresses. Like I remember I panicked on the chem phys section and I went to the bathroom and during that break and I was like, you need to get it together. You have 3 more sections. You paid a lot of time and money into this test and it ended up working out well. I did well. In the last push out of the last 3 sections. And I think if I hadn't taken that moment to really pause and have a conversation with myself to calm my anxiety, I might not have been able to push through. I think that for me, I would really like to impart that wisdom to really practice early, to think about strategies to calm yourself as you're preparing and make sure that you continue to practice those well-being habits as you continue through your medical career, because it's something that isn't going away and it's something that you just have to learn to get better at and continue to adjust to for every exam you take, for every board exam you take. And importantly, make sure that you're preparing for the MCAT in a way that lines up with your application cycle. So I think I put so much time and energy into my MCAT because it is a really big thing that you have to study for and emotionally prepare for. And I took my MCAT at the very last week in May. And then I had a really quick turnaround to have to complete my primary application, all my activities. And I know we're not talking about application prep here, but you need time to prepare for that application. You need to spend a lot of time with yourself, being able to understand what it means to talk about your career in medicine, to talk about yourself, to write about it in an eloquent way. And for me, it took a lot longer than I thought. It took months. And I unfortunately applied late from that. And I really think that you need to apply right on time to be the most competitive applicant, regardless of your scores, regardless of your experience. And I unfortunately had to reapply to med school a second time, and I didn't change my MCAT score. I didn't really change much about my activities. It was 1 year back to back. I really think timing was a big portion of it. And so I wish in hindsight that I had left a good month and a half to actually write my essays, or at least have been drafting things before I started the MCAT. And I was so overwhelmed with kind of the study content to really feel like I had a strong application that was representative of me, representative of why I loved medicine, my skills, and my leadership experiences going into medical school, as well as the MCAT score. So similar to Oliver, make sure that you give yourself that time to really reflect and be able to write about a strong app and have the experiences that are going to produce a strong app without worrying too much about the timeline. Because in all honesty, I'm really glad that I didn't get into medical school the first time. A lot of great things happened to me and I ended up here. So there's always kind of a bigger plan and a reason for why you might need to take some time. So be kind to yourself and make sure that you're putting your best foot forward and that you're preparing in advance like you are now by coming to this seminar, to think about your timing and how you want to approach preparing for the MCAT, because it is a big process. And I really commend everyone for getting on here, thinking about it early, and really trying to put your best foot forward, because that's the best you can do. And you will all be great doctors no matter what.
Thanks, Natalia. That's really good. Jenny, can you tell us about this?
Yeah, so belaboring the point again, but making sure that even though I did my diagnostic test early, it's something that I'm happy that I did, but I wish I would have incorporated even more question banks and even more test taking strategies that I would along the way, so I could have kept honing that ability to make sure that I was like primed for taking the MCAT exam. And I think that I needed to be able to trust myself as well with where like my knowledge was growing and where my knowledge was failing and how I addressed certain problems along the way. And so I know that we're going through all these different motions right now, but I know that we need to also remind ourselves that we need to be kind to ourselves in this entire process, that we're human, that we make mistakes. I didn't like the MCAT score that I got the first time. I ran with it. Very happy for my first cycle. I just wanted to get it done with in the first go. And I just really saw that I struggled with some areas while I was like studying, and I wish that I would have given myself the kindness to know that maybe I was stressed out with work that day and that's why I wasn't able to get more than an hour of studying in. Or maybe I should change some commitments around so that I can have that weekend off to like stimulate an environment like Natalia and take my practice exam like in a library or in a coffee shop or something, and like make it as realistic as possible. Or make sure that I'm sitting down with these books and understanding concepts, but not for too long so I don't get drawn into the learning phase and the book phase that Oliver was talking about, because there were some sections that when I was feeling very insecure about, that's something that I would end up doing and it would be a waste of my time. And that's why it took me so long to end up preparing for the MCAT. But also, I'm happy that I did take that time because it was something that I needed to do personally in my journey. And I know that your mileage will vary, so this will be different for everybody. And I know that there's no right or wrong way to really prepare for the MCAT exam as long as you are just doing things as early as possible. And if you're giving yourself that time to know that, like until you're saying you will be a doctor, just remind yourself that you will be a doctor, and you just know that if you need more time, take that time. If you need to push something back, push something back. If you're feeling that you're not performing as well as you are on some exam right now in your undergrad and your post-bac, or while you're taking your practice exams right now, really ask yourself, what is getting in the way of my success? And really try to deal with those obstacles first, because you need to remind yourself again that you're human and that you're putting up with a lot of different stressors on top of wanting to be this amazing physician that's going to go change the world and do amazing things. So I know that I wish I could have told myself a lot of those things looking back, and I would have probably been less stressed as I am right now and stuff like that moving forward in life.
Great, thank you so much. All three of you gave beautiful, excellent answers with lots of different experiences, which I think is what's so important. It just proves the point that everybody has different life experiences, different things are going on, and you have to prepare a certain way for yourself and give yourself time. It sounds like everybody says, just give yourself some time to do things and know when you're at a limit for yourself for a bit. So, okay, that was excellent. So we are finished with our questioning portion, and we're going to move into the Q&A section. So we're going to take, there's a lot of attendees on the webinar. So we'll try to answer every question, but we're not going to be able to get to everyone. There's too many people, too many questions. If you haven't already entered your question in the Q&A, go ahead and do so now, but we already have some front-loaded, ready to go that people have already asked. Don't use the chat box because we won't see it that way. We need the Q&A so that they can get fed correctly. So let's see. All right, let me find the first question. This one's for everyone. So this is for Oliver, Natalia, and Jenny. What resources specifically did you use to prepare? And also, how many practice exams did you end up taking? And whomever would like to start, feel free to go. Jenny, go ahead.
Oh, well, Oliver's on my right on my screen, so that's why.
Oh, sorry. You just look like you were waving at me.
Okay. Yeah, sure. I'll be just short and sweet about it. I think I took between 8 to 10 practice exams. And they were crowdsourced from like Kaplan, from the AAMC's resources. I also used the Fee Assistant program because very low SES. So I need to make sure that I can like gather as many resources as I can with the limited resources that I do have. And I utilized like, I think Atlas had like a free exam online. I think the Princeton Review had a free exam online. And I'm forgetting the first part of that question that you said, but like.
Which resources, other resources did you use outside of the practice exam?
Yeah, and I crowdsourced a lot like Natalia and Oliver were getting at earlier. Trust Reddit more than you think. A lot of good resources can be found online like that. And I would just like listen to like the brands that were there and really just took piecemeal what I could. Again, try not to feel like there's too much resource overload, but like just take what you can from each thing and move on with it, basically.
Okay, great. Natalia or Oliver, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying about resource overload. That's kind of a thing in med school too. And everyone comes in orientation week and they're trying to like buy all these different programs and it's just too much. I really tried to stick with one thing like Kaplan as my main foundation and then supplement wherever was needed. Like if concepts weren't really clear for me, I would use Khan Academy videos or other things I would find on YouTube to supplement. But I mostly just stuck with Kaplan and then Anki for spaced repetition in addition to my own flashcards. And as far as the practice exams, I just did the 3 that were on the AMC website at the time. I don't know how many they have now. This was in 2018, but I didn't use any other outside exams.
Okay, thank you. Natalia?
I also took about 8 to 10 practice tests, like Jenny said. Sometimes I did in my earlier studying, I would just do a section at a time, which is a great resource if you're kind of focusing on some sections. Another tip I would say about studying is make sure you're not doing the same thing every day for a week. Make sure you're doing kind of spaced repetition of studying. So you do a little bit of psych on Monday, then switch to chem on Tuesday and vice versa, or you can mix up your days. That really helps kind of keep my brain fresh and feel like I wasn't stuck in this study schedule of doing the same thing over and over again. I also used like the self-study course with Kaplan, but I found a lot of free resources with that on the Reddit website that were very similar. I bought some Kaplan resources from other students who were selling them at a lower price. They don't change too much from year to year. So that's another great way to crowdsource material, as well as I really also, you'd be surprised that a lot of your coursework is fairly similar. Sometimes the coursework goes in a lot of depth, but I use a lot of my old notes and things to explain concepts. I mean, you're paying for school, you might as well pay for some Mcat Prep at the same time. But I think that the biggest thing that was helpful for me was getting access to practice tests and having some variability in the type of practice tests you take. I do believe that some of the ones like Kaplan are slightly harder than some of the actual Mcat course itself. That was something that I found in my experience, but I felt like besides Kaplan, all the other ones were very indicative of the actual exam itself. And I think that it was really helpful to take those very close to the practice test because I did see a slight fluctuation in my scores.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this next one is for Oliver. Do you have advice for a non-traditional working full-time person that is finding studying for and taking the MCAT to be a huge task in front of them?
I guess first of all, it depends what you mean by non-traditional. I think people use this term very differently. Like when I use it, I meant that I wasn't a pre-med in undergrad and I wasn't really working towards this and collecting the sort of experiences that a lot of people who know they're going to go into med school are going to get. I was still a biochem major, so I still had a really solid science background. And as far as the working full-time, I'm sorry, I can't answer that one because I had a really flexible job at a time where I was working on commission and I basically worked as little or as much as I wanted. And I also had family support. So it was really just about keeping the bills going and not trying to balance any other responsibilities with the MCAT. So, maybe someone else could answer that.
I think, Jenny, didn't you mention that you had to work all along throughout while preparing? Is that correct?
Yeah, and I was actually getting through typing up that question answer to, but I can answer it live as well. So And it's a great question because I don't think we emphasize the privilege of being able to have enough time to really allocate time to studying for this very, very, very important exam. And I didn't have the luxury of a 9-to-5 job as a research assistant while I was working during my gap years. And I had to find ways to study on the way to work, on the way home, during breaks, after work, before work, getting permission to do it during while I was waiting for some experiments to go finish up and whatnot. And I tried to be realistic with how much time I would put into the day. I asked myself, or rather I looked at my spreadsheet each week to see what my hours per day were going to be for that week. And I then revised it at the end of the week to see what I ended up doing, realistically, to then adjust to see what I needed to allot more time towards the next following week. And then I really just took it a week at a time, because I found that ideally I wanted to get 5 hours of studying and after work every single day and make it work perfectly, and then take my full-length exams every Saturday, blah, blah, blah. And it never looked like that. So I had to just really be more flexible with what life was throwing at me along the way. And I think if I would have realized that one also sooner, it would have made the entire process much less stressful for me.
Okay. Yes, thanks, Jenny. Yeah, that's a good point. You can study anywhere, and it doesn't have to be 2 hours at a sitting. A short, quick, study session of 20, 30 minutes is just as helpful, and sometimes more helpful than a 2 or 3 hour one, because you get exhausted at the end and then you start forgetting and reading the same thing over and over. So that's a really good point. Thank you for that.
Erica,
this one's
just
also
to
for
chime
you.
in, I was just
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I saw a lot of questions in the Q&A about what to do if you're in school. So I just wanted to share my experience with that.
Please do.
If you can, I would really suggest taking a class that maybe you haven't taken yet that you know you're going to need for your pre-med requirements during that time, because that saved me a lot of time. Because as I was studying for my biochem or my psychology exam, I was studying essentially for those sections in the MCAT. So I really feel like that was super helpful for me. And I would, if you possibly could, I tried to take one less class than I usually do, to take a lighter class load to allow me some flexibility in my daily schedule. And I really tried to treat it much more like a class that I had to attend rather than just regular study time that can be really unstructured. I tried to block out certain times during my week that I was dedicated to MCAT, and had really specific time to actually say that I was going to work on specific sections or specific concepts. And that really helped me stay focused. But kind of like Jenny said, I think I wish I had adjusted my study expectations a lot earlier when I realized they weren't necessarily going my way at the beginning or during an exam week, because I think that would have saved me a lot of personal stress and kind of that guilt cycle of getting mad at yourself for not doing what you said you would, versus actually just being realistic with my expectations. And that's helped me manage a lot of the stress of medical school better, to be much more realistic and make sure that if I did a week and I found out that my allotted 1 hour time was really taking 3, that I readjusted my schedule for that week to week. And if possible, I would try to study on those breaks that you have from school. Like if you want to study over Christmas, if you want to maybe take spring break off that year, if you want to take some time to actually dedicate free time that's already allowed into a college schedule, I think that was really helpful to make sure that your timeline is set up, that you don't have to work. Like I worked in the summer, so I knew that wasn't an option for me to be able to study and work at the same time based on my work schedule. So that was really helpful to see how you could work with upperclassmen who've done it before and how they managed it with school, and how you could work with your deans or other advisors to allot some extra time than usual to study for the MCAT.
Great, thank you so much. Here's another one. This one's for Jenny. Can you talk a little bit about the mental preparation you use to get ready? Many test takers go in feeling intimidated, scared, worried, etc. And this also might be for Natalia as well after Jenny answers. But
yeah, since we both touched on the anxiety piece and the nervousness that you can carry with this exam, I really had to develop good coping skills. And I think Natalia alluded to this a bit as well early on. That's something that you should really develop as early as possible. Again, another emphasis to do something early and to utilize that skill as you're moving forward with your career trajectory right now, because I needed to like manage panic attacks when I was doing something poorly, and I needed to call like friends or family and like get them to remind me of why I wanted to be a physician scientist, and like do all the things again when everything was getting super difficult along the road. So and yoga and like cooking and finding little things that give you dopamine and like finding ways to be happy really helped me de-stress along the way and like cope. But yeah.
Natalia, did you have anything? Because I know you had mentioned that as well, so that'd be good.
So like I said, I really think going to a simulated environment was a really great tip that I got from some people to help simulate maybe the stress of being in a new environment and what it was like to actually focus on taking a full-length test with that type of stress. I was lucky enough to grow up with a psychologist as a mother, so she taught me a lot of coping mechanisms very early on in my life. But I think that it was really important to have kind of a backup plan. And if you really feel like your anxiety is going to overwhelm you on test day, for me, it was going to the bathroom and kind of like being able to take deep breaths and talk to myself and make sure that I had a way to calm myself down and kind of remind myself why I was here, why I was grounded in doing this in the first place. I think that's a really important thing to keep in your mind, because it can get lost in all of this preparation and chaos of what truly brought you here and why you wanted to be here. And that's very grounding when you're having anxiety about it. And I also think it's really important to talk about it to your friends, and don't just keep it in. I know there's a big misconception in the medical community that people don't talk about their test scores and people don't talk about their stress and they want to act like their life is perfect. But you are around a community, if you are in a pre-med curriculum or you are a non-traditional student who's maybe working in clinical environments, you're with a lot of people who may or may not have been through this process before, and they have great advice to give you, and they have a lot of complaints probably that they would like to share back with you. And I think that if you can kind of have the courage to initiate that conversation, it's something that really calmed me to share my stress and not feel like I was alone, that a lot of other people were going through this too. And I think that became a big resource for me, because my family didn't necessarily understand what I was going through, and my friends from other schools who weren't pre-med definitely didn't understand what I was going through and were asking why I was skipping out on a lot of things. And it was important to stay grounded in people who were going through the same thing and had kind of a same mission and same purpose, to feel rejuvenated when I really felt down.
Great, thanks, Natalia. So what I'm hearing both Jenny and Natalia say in this particular sense is find your community. It could be your family, it could be friends, it could be people that are in the same, like the EMTs you worked with, et cetera. But it sounds like one of the things to help with that stress is have them help talk you through it and be open about it with your community, whomever that might be. So we did try to get through as many questions as we could, but we are at time. Let's see. But thank you all for staying to the end. We appreciate that very much. As a reminder, we are going to select 10 attendees to receive an AMC Mcat official prep bundle, and we'll follow up with you if you were selected. Also, please take a moment and fill out our survey. It's a very short one, so that we can continue to develop webinars that you're interested in and resources and things that we can help you all with. And then on the screen, you'll see some helpful links and some information. The fee assistance program is also there. So, take a look at that. Our website is a very good resource. And then I will turn it back over to Emily to close us out. Thank you again, and have a great evening, everyone. And thanks for sticking it out with us.
Thank you. And with that, we must conclude today's program. Please give us your feedback on today's presentation by filling out the webinar evaluation that will pop up on your screen when the webinar ends. On behalf of the Association of American Medical Colleges, thank you to our speakers and, of course, all of today's participants. Have a great evening. You may now disconnect.